For 9 years, my mother mailed back every birthday card a 6-year-old girl ever sent her, and she never once imagined that one day she would need that same little girl's signature to keep her own house. My name is Claire Whitfield, and I'm 34 years old. The year I turned 25, I fell in love with a widower named Daniel Marsh and his 4-year-old daughter, Wren. My mother, Deborah, looked at Wren across our dinner table the night I brought them home and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that she wasn't interested in raising someone else's leftover child. That was the phrase she used, leftover child. My father folded his hands and stared at his plate. My older brother, Grant, refilled his wine glass like nothing had happened at all. I married Daniel anyway, in a backyard with 12 folding chairs and a secondhand dress. My mother didn't come. For the next 9 years, Wren mailed a birthday card to her grandmother every single year because I told her family was something you kept trying for, even when it didn't try back. Every single one of those cards came back unopened, stamped return to sender, my mother's handwriting slashed through the address like she was crossing out a mistake. I kept every one of them in a shoebox on the top shelf of our closet. I told myself I was saving them so Wren would understand someday that she had tried. What I didn't know yet was that somewhere in a lawyer's office 3 states away, my grandmother Iris had done something my mother never saw coming, and that shoebox of rejected cards was about to become the only proof I needed. Growing up, our house ran on a very specific kind of math. My mother didn't ask kind, she asked if you were useful, if you reflected well, if you added to the family story or subtracted from it. Grant was the addition. He went to the right college, married the right woman, and never once embarrassed anyone at a dinner party. I was tolerated as long as I stayed in line. The moment I brought home a widowed contractor and his little girl, I became the subtraction. Daniel never once asked me to choose. He used to say that if my mother ever decided to come around, our door would already be open, and he meant it, even on the nights I wanted to lock it forever. We built our life slowly. He ran a small renovation business. I did the books and picked up substitute teaching shifts. Wren grew from a shy 4-year-old who checked the driveway to see if I'd really into a sharp, funny 13-year-old who kept her returned cards from previous years taped inside her closet door like a strange kind of trophy case, evidence of every year she tried and been refused. There was one person in my family who never returned my calls, and that was my grandmother Iris. She was my mother's mother. Sharp. Daniel's business grew steadily over those years. Then unexpectedly, dramatically, when a regional home builder acquired his renovation company in a deal that made the local paper. It wasn't a fortune by billionaire standards, but on paper, our household was suddenly worth several $1,000,000, and paper has a way of traveling fast in families that keep score. 11 days after the announcement ran, my phone rang, and it was my mother's number for the first time in almost a decade. Her voice was warm, syrupy, like no time had passed at all. She said it had been too long. That family should come first, that she wanted to sit down and heal what had been broken. I should have hung up right then, but some stubborn, hopeful part of me still wanted to believe her, even after everything. She and Grant came to our house that Saturday, and my mother brought a leather folder that looked like it had been prepared long before that phone call. Inside was a proposal dressed up as reconciliation, a contribution toward Grant's failing investment fund, a monthly allowance for my parents' retirement, framed as compensation for raising me, and one final line that made my hands go cold. A formal statement released to the extended family, confirming that I had reconciled and returned to the fold, alongside written confirmation releasing any claim I, or, in her words, my husband's daughter, might have to my grandmother's estate. That last line was the one Daniel read twice, slowly. My mother's face flickered, just for a second, before she smoothed it back into that practiced warmth. She had no idea what that single sentence had just handed us, because 2 months earlier, a letter had arrived from a law firm we'd never heard of, informing us that Grandma Iris's estate, including the family lake house my mother had spent her whole life treating as proof of the Whitfield name, had been placed in a trust years before her death, and the beneficiary listed, alongside myself, was Wren Marsh, my stepdaughter, the leftover child, the one my mother had. She said the estate, the lake house, all of it was Whitfield property, always had been, and that my grandmother surely hadn't meant to complicate things by including outsiders. Grant, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke, and it was worse than anything my mother had said. He told me the lake house needed serious repair work, foundation, some kind of environmental assessment, and that without my signature releasing any claim, the trust couldn't be liquidated to cover his fund's losses. He said it like it was a formality, like I owed him that. I want you to understand what happened next, because it wasn't a shouting match. It was quieter than that, and somehow it hit harder. I went to the hall closet and I brought down the shoebox, 9 years of birthday card, every single one stamped return to sender in my mother's own handwriting, still sealed, never opened. I set them on the table next to her leather. You spent 9 years telling her she wasn't family, I said, and now you need her signature to save yours. My mother reached for the cards, like she could somehow undo the return address written in her own hand. She started to say something about how things were complicated back then, how she'd been protecting the family name, and I let her get halfway through the sentence before I stopped her. There's no version of complicated that explains sending a 6-year-old's birthday card back unopened, I said. You didn't protect anything. You just made sure she'd remember exactly where she stood. That was when Daniel called Wren downstairs. She was 17 by then, and she came into that kitchen holding her own folder, the one she'd built quietly over the years without me even knowing. Every returned card photographed and dated, every one of my mother's silences documented in her own careful handwriting, because it turned out she was more like me than either of us realized. She set the folder down next to the cards and looked at my mother directly for what might have been the first time in her entire life. "You don't get my signature," she said, "not because I'm angry, because you never once asked who I was before you needed something from me." My mother had no response to that. Grant tried one more time to talk about the fund, about fairness, about family owing family, and I told him plainly that the estate would remain exactly as Grandma Iris had structured it, protected, untouched, and entirely outside his reach. They left that afternoon without the folder, without the signature, and without the story they'd walked in expecting to tell. A few weeks later, my father called. Alone, for the first time in 9 years. He didn't ask for any. He just said he was sorry he'd stayed quiet for so long, and that he'd like to know his granddaughter, if she was ever willing. I told him that decision belonged to Ren now, and only to her. People ask me sometimes if the money changed things. It didn't. What changed things was watching a 17-year-old girl, once dismissed as leftover baggage, hold the one piece of paper that mattered more than any folder my mother ever brought to our table. Family was never about the name on the estate. It was about who kept showing up. Year after year, even when every single card came back unopened. If someone in your life has ever made you feel like you were too much trouble to keep, I hope you hear that. You don't owe your presence to people who only remember you when they need some. Keep your receipts, keep your peace, and know exactly who deserves your signature. If this story moved you, like it, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories like this one. I'll see you in the next one. Now please upload your competitor's thumbnail image so I can analyze it and design your enhanced thumbnail prompt.